The News from Lake Wobegon podcast is brought to you by Gold Medal Flour. With varieties from all-purpose to better for bread to whole wheat, Gold Medal makes flour for all your baking needs. Over 125 years of baking success.
Well, it's been a quiet week in Lake Wobegon, my hometown, out on the edge of the prairie. It's been beautiful out there this last week. You know, it's just here we are, the end of March, the beginning of April, and suddenly it was getting warmer and warmer, and the ice was off the lake, and the red-winged blackbirds were everywhere, and the crocus was poking up, and still there were people in Lake Wobegon who were saying, just you wait, we're going to get more snow, we're going to get another snowstorm before this month is over, and they said it even into the 1st of April, and then it was 81 degrees. 81 degrees, and those voices of doom were silent. All these old wise people who knew that we needed to get one more blizzard yet to break our hearts at the end of March, they just suddenly faded away. And for once, life was like a fairy tale, and it was just so easy, and all the people were out gardening, and the sound of the lawnmower was heard, and the beautiful smell of fresh cut grass. I used to feel sorry for people who had to work so hard to groom their yards back when I was a kid, and they never ever got to enjoy the grass the way we kids did. We played football in the grass, and we got our noses pushed down into it, and we got to smell it. We got to lie out there at night in the beautiful grass and look up at the stars. We really got the most out of those yards when we were kids. I remember when I was in the 6th grade, Julie Christensen, who I barely knew, she lived over on the other side of town. Why was I over at her house? I don't remember. I remember her backyard, the swing set where her younger brothers and sisters swung, and those spruce trees that her father had planted when they were tiny, and they'd grown to be 15, 20 feet high in the time that we'd spent in school. She and I were sitting out on the grass. She was kind of a tomboy. She played softball. We put her in right field, but she was better than most of us. She was fast. She could outrun most boys. She had a big shock of blonde hair on her head tied back with a rubber band. We were sitting there side by side, 13 years old, and she looked at me and she said, "Would you like to wrestle?" She had brothers, and I guess one of them was not available. I had never wrestled with a girl before, and I looked at her, not sure what to say. I was brought up not to attack a girl. That was against our code. I thought about this, and while I was thinking about it, she dove onto me, and she pushed me down. She wrapped her powerful arms around me, and we lay there in the grass, and she wrapped her legs around my waist, and her hair was in my face, and then her face was alongside my head, and I can remember feeling her ribs against mine and her arms around me, and I struggled to break her hold, and I got free, and I got up on my knees, and then she took me down again, and when she took me down again, I realized that the difference between winning and losing was negligible. Winning was not important, nor was losing. And I had this powerful feeling that I can't describe in words unless you've had this feeling yourself. This feeling of fear and shame and delight all together at one time. Shame, because I knew this was wrong to wrestle with a girl, and I knew that if somebody had yelled from the house, "You kids cut that out," I would have felt terrible, and I would have run away into the woods and not shown my face for a long time. I knew that this was nothing I wanted anybody to know about, and yet I loved wrestling with her. I hope that doesn't make you think less of me. It was amazing to wrestle with her and to feel her body against mine and to hear her breath against the side of my cheek and feel her arms around me. We rolled over once and then twice, and then I was on top, and I could have gotten off, but I did not. And then something else happened. I forget what. But I was reminded of it this last week when I smelled the grass in Lake Wobegon. And I saw fish, sturgeon, in the river who were doing something similar to what we did in the grass and who were writhing around each other in the water. And I saw two Canada geese whose necks were rubbing against each other in this same manner as Julie and I did long ago. Canada geese are monogamous, and so you know that this pair of geese out there nuzzling each other, they've had their arguments, they've had times when they wouldn't talk to each other, when they were sick of each other, but here they are, still nuzzling against each other. Even this last week, Holy Week, it was the week for windows to be cleaned, and Pastor and Mrs. Inkvist were sleeping in. This was Tuesday morning, and they had paid their boys to wash their windows, and the boys washed the downstairs windows, and then they got out the aluminum ladder to climb up to the second floor of the rectory, and here was their parents' bedroom, the boys on the ladder, and here were their parents in bed, just lying there next to each other, and their father was reading at his place, but their mother had her head on his shoulder, and as they looked in through the window, frozen by the horror of it, to see your own parents in bed, they saw their mother put her leg over between their father's legs, and they couldn't get down that ladder fast enough. They went down. Well, I'm sorry to bring up the subject. I was just thinking of it this last week, thinking about Julie Christensen and smelling grass. It was an interesting week at Lake Wobegon Lutheran because a bishop came through the door on Wednesday. They hadn't seen a bishop ever. Bernetta was there in the office, and she had never seen one in her life. He walked in his sort of reddish bishop shirt with the white collar, and he was lost. He couldn't find and here he was in Lake Wobegon, and here was a Lutheran church in his district, and he'd never heard of this church before, the bishop. He walked in, and there was Pastor Inkvist, and they made a big fuss. He's a bishop, after all, and they made fresh coffee, and Bernetta stared at him through the door, just a big white-haired man with a paunch, very dignified looking. She's kind of running into problems in her marriage. She's been married to Larry for 22 years, and ever since she's been taking fish oil now, she's been really feeling kind of restless and feeling she'd like to move to Tuscany, but she's not sure how to do this. And here was a bishop appearing before her eyes like a magical figure out of nowhere. He looked at Pastor Inkvist and he said, "Where did you come from?" Which sounded like a catechism question. "We were founded by Norwegian immigrants," said Pastor Inkvist. The church was started back in 1879. "Why haven't I ever heard of you? I don't have you on my list or anything. You're in my district. I'm responsible for you." "Well, Pastor," I said, "I don't know. I thought we were on your list." Well, didn't you receive, and you must have noticed you didn't receive any mail from us, any notices or letters from the district office. "Well, I figured it was because we were doing everything right." "Well, how long have you been here?" What, me? Yeah, you. "How long have you been?" "Well, I've been here for 30 years. 30 years? Well, that's not supposed to be. I don't have pastors put down roots. That doesn't work. You've been here too long," the pastor said, drinking his coffee. It wasn't bad coffee. They have special coffees set aside for special guests, angels, bishops. We don't have pastors stick around for 30 years. You should have moved on years ago. No, people get too familiar with you, and then you start to sugarcoat your gospel message, and you're no longer preaching the truth. This happens. People stay around too long. Down Unity Lutheran down in St. Paul, that happened down there. My predecessor, he was all occupied with other things, and he was occupied with this radical vegan element in the Lutheran Church, which felt that carnivores should not be ordained in the ministry, and we had to go through a lot of trouble over that. And then there was this sexual scandal where a couple of Lutheran pastors were accused of making eye contact with young women in the choir, and so that had to be all worked through. And meanwhile, nobody was supervising this pastor at Unity Lutheran, and he'd been there for years and years and years and years. And I came in, and he'd been there for 20 years, and in those 20 years, his gospel message had just slowly degenerated into just preaching about trees and flowers and the rainbow and the sun, and the world is full of love and everything's going to turn out okay in the end, which is not Martin Luther. This is Rodgers and Hammerstein. So I told him to shape up and ship out, and he shipped out, and all of his parish went with him, everybody under 50, and now he's preaching in a gymnasium out in the suburbs, and he does 5 services every Sunday morning, and he's got 50,000 members, and that little Unity Lutheran Church, they've got 102 members, and all of them over 70 years old. Go figure. No, it's time for you to move on, Enquist. We got to move you on. And then he went off to Brainerd. He was scheduled to go up there for a meeting the rural needs of people. So Pastor Enquist had to think this over. Time to move on. His family's all in favor of it. They'd like to live in the city, more opportunities, music and education and libraries and so on. His wife, Judy, wants to go back to school, become a life coach and get paid for what she's been doing as a pastor's wife all these years. He's got an offer on his desk from the Mall of America to come and be the chaplain. Have to perform weddings in the Chapel of Love, but why not? Why not? It's spring. Spring, time to move on, time for something new. Nature tells this over and over and over again. And I go back, I keep going back to 1955 and the lawn and that beautiful grass at night, and Julie, and her long arms and her legs. It took me a year to approach her again. I moved slowly in those days, but I found a way to go over to her house a year later. She looked so different. She was wearing a skirt now and not jeans, and she seemed to be wearing lipstick. And we sat in the sunset and looked at each other. She looked as if she didn't quite remember me. My love, oh my love, my love. I said, "Do you want to wrestle?" She looked at me as if I'd suggested that she have an earthworm sandwich with lard on it. She looked at me in horror and disgust. But I have this good memory. I have a good memory. I remember it very clearly. I remember her long legs and her long arms and her shock of blonde hair. It's right next to my face. I can feel her breathing on me right now. We were intertwined. We were tangled like sturgeon, like steelheads, like Canada geese. I've got to stop. I can't say anymore. And that's the news from Lake Wobegon, where all the women are strong, all the men are good looking, and all the children are above average.